Welcome to Hobby with Ollie. My name is Ollie, and this is my hobby. The most recent codex released by Games Workshop for 9th edition 40k is the Chaos Demons Codex, and all sorts of evil horrors dedicated to Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle and Slaanesh are sure to be roaming tables everywhere as we speak. But in the distant past, there was another Chaos God. And to this day, in the 41st millennium, this hierarch of anarchy and terror still has followers who strike fear into the followers of Abaddon and the Emperor alike. This god was Malal, or later Malice. Putting the chaotic into chaos, Malice is an anarchic presence, emerging as a god who required his followers to hunt out those devoted to other chaos gods to grow in power. The Sons of Malice are one of the few followers of this most ineffable of chaos gods, appearing back in the 3rd edition codex for Chaos Space Marines, clad in their quartered black and white scheme. Today, I'll be painting a Chaos Lord in Terminator armor in this color scheme, with a bit of a modern twist. This is also my second ever commission model, so a big thanks to Robert for getting me into this completely new scheme and army. Let's get into it. In order to paint the quartered scheme, I opted for a white primer. This will make it much easier to paint the white, and the black will have the coverage to go over the relevant portions of the armor. As this is a commission model for somebody else, I also opted to paint in sub-assemblies. Normally for my own models I prefer a one and done approach, but this seemed like a good idea, particularly with the quartered scheme. For the black, I mixed a single drop of deoxazine purple ink into Vallejo black, applying 2 or 3 thin layers over the white primer until I got an even coverage. The end result looks black for all intents and purposes, but the addition of just that little bit of colour allows me to use pure black for the recess shade on the model. For highlights, I kept with the subtly purple tinge by mixing Xerius purple into light grey to make a lightly purple tinged grey colour. I used this to edge highlight all the black armour panels. For the white areas, I used light grey as a base coat. As I discussed in my Painting Loyalist Marines video, see here, when painting white armour, it's important to leave yourself room to highlight with white, so by starting from a light grey, I could add more and more white in to provide my highlights, and then use pure white as an edge highlight. Now the interesting twist. As the Sons of Malice have now abandoned their post to guard the Cadian Gate and fled into the Eye of Terror, they are touched by the warp. To represent this, in areas where the black and white meet, I added tendrils of purple and black, which I highlighted with light grey and white to represent the struggle of chaos against itself. The black and white parts of the armour are consuming each other, just like the Sons of Malice are both enemies and worshippers of chaos. With the main armour colour recipes decided, I could now look at other details. One of the advantages of doing a commission paint is the ability to refer to reference images to make sure you are getting the colours that they want. For the trim, I painted first with Vallejo gunmetal, which I shaded over using Nuln Oil. Once this was dry, I came in with Vallejo Bright Brass Air Paint. This paint is very thin and has very poor coverage with a brush, but it's perfect for my purposes here. I wanted a very light desaturated gold, so I applied it directly over my gunmetal layer, leaving some gaps while also trying to avoid pooling the paint around rivets in the armour. This gives the right gold colour while leaving visual interest with that silver colour still showing through. I then highlighted sparingly using Vallejo aluminium so I didn't lose the overall gold effect. With the main colours sorted, it was on to details. For the cloak, I used Vallejo grey blue as my main colour for the interior, adding black for shades in the folds and adding a light grey to the mix for highlights on the raised folds, with pure light grey for an edge highlight. The outside of the cloak was painted black using the same colours as the armour and the same method as the inside of the cloak. The key to getting the flowing nature of cloaks is in glazing between different layers, as you don't have the same sharp edges as you might on a piece of armour. Just water down your paint a lot, wipe the moisture off onto a paper towel, and then drag the thin layer of paint from light to dark. If you're interested in how I learned to glaze, check out this video here from the early days of the channel. On to another detail and another new technique. For the horns on the helmet, I wanted to try wet blending. This is basically a way of getting a smooth transition between colours without as much glazing. I highly recommend the use of a wet palette for this. Firstly, get all the colours you'll need on your wet palette. I decided to use Vallejo Burnt Umber, Middlestone, and Light Brown as my 3 tones. I started with the Burnt Umber, applying thin paint onto the bottom half of the horns. While the paint was still wet, I washed my brush and took the Middlestone and using a similar method to glazing, dragged my Middlestone into the Burnt Umber. This should mix the paints directly on the model, giving a really organic transition between the two, perfect for things like bones and skulls. I then did the same with the middle stone and the light brown on around the top third of that part of the model. Now, I was really happy with the result, but as I'm impatient, I decided to hairdry it to have the paint dry faster. Main learning curve from this is just let it dry by itself, as I had to come in and redo the effect because the paint ran all over my white armor. Whoops. Continuing with organic material, I also painted the fur lining around his cloak, very jazzy, and I used greenish browns as a base coat before highlighting with progressively more and more middle stone. I made sure to leave some variation in the highlights so that it didn't look too uniform. Next, I painted up the spikes that go on the top of this guy. This is an interesting detail that I worked hard on to get a cool blood spatter effect coming out of that little pouch containing who knows what. However, I'm not actually going to be focusing on the paint job much for this part. This is because, in the end, I decided to leave these bits off of the finished model because when I consulted with Robert, we both agreed they looked a little cartoony. No judgment if that's how you like your Chaos models, but it's not how we wanted this one. One of the key things to good results from commissions, regardless of the line of work you're in, is communication. Throughout the painting process, I was sending images and thoughts to Robert to put our brains together and come out with a final result that we were both happy with. And although I spent more time than I care to admit on them making spikes that are not even going to go on the model look really cool, the model does look better without them. On a similar note, I'll also be repainting the cloak up to Robert's specifications after this video goes out, with a sort of leathery, fleshy tone, as unfortunately, the Sons of Malice have developed some very particular food preferences. Next was time to paint the arms. The armor was painted in the same fashion as I showed on the rest of the model, and the combi weapon was given the standard metallic treatment: gunmetal, null oil, and then a few extra dabs of Agrex Earthshade and Reichland Flesh Shade around the barrel for wear and tear. I then added a coppery accent colour to break up all that metal so it wasn't just one big lump of gunmetal. For the white arm, I'd been asked to paint the axe as a demonic weapon. As a follower of the Emperor, I'm not quite sure what that means, but a quick Google search and excommunication from the Imperium gave me the idea to do a red glow. Here, I attempted to use a similar wet blending method to what I did on the various bone elements around the model, going from red through orange to a yellow highlight on the edges of the blade. I finished off this foul heretical axe with some dark red washed into the recesses. That just left the rock he's standing on, and I kept it simple for now: green browns and a highlight with a lighter grey brown, and this guy is all finished. I had a lot of fun with my first ever commission here on the channel and learned a lot. If you're interested in coming with me on my hobby journey, consider subscribing to the channel and watching another video. If you like this one, I'm sure there's something else here that you might like. In the meantime, my name has been Ollie, this has been my hobby, and I'll see you next time.